All right, looks like that attendee number has slowed down a little bit. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Hopefully everyone can see my screen and that's working all right. One of my colleagues can jump in and let me know if not, otherwise I will proceed. So thank you so much everyone for joining us today for our STAR Center webinar on effective workplace communication skills and strategies. All right, we are here today on behalf of the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved, or ACU. We were started a little over 25 years ago now by alumni of the National Health Service Corps. And ACU has a ton of wonderful programming, all really designed to support the workforce at community health centers. We have resources around care and clinician support, recruitment and retention, as well as many other wonderful programs. So when you have a moment, I encourage you to check out clinicians.org and see all the great things that we're up to. But I am here today specifically representing the STAR Center as one of the branches underneath the ACU umbrella. And STAR stands for Solutions, Training, and Assistance for Recruitment and Retention. We are funded here at the STAR Center through a national cooperative agreement, and this is actually our 12th project year, I believe, that we are in now. And we are funded by the Bureau of Primary Health Care and the Health Resources Services Administration, or BIPIC and HRSA, if you're familiar. And we are one of 22 national training and technical assistance partners, or NTAPs, each of whom has their own unique area of specialty, and ours here at the STAR Center is all things recruitment and retention. So everything that we create, all of these webinar opportunities, all of our publications and resources is all available free of charge to you all. And so when you have a moment after this lovely webinar has wrapped up, please feel free to visit our website, chcworkforce.org, and check out all of the great things that we have available to support your work. And of course, at any time, please feel free to reach out to us at info@chcworkforce.org with any and all workforce questions you may have. Believe it or not, that goes to a real person. It goes to me. So we are happy to help however we can. And this is our wonderful, lovely STAR Center team here. I'm all the way on the end of your screen over here, Sydney Axelrod. I am the Associate Director of Workforce Development here on the STAR Center team. And you'll get these slides afterwards, and you have all of our direct email addresses as well if you prefer to reach out directly. We are happy to support. All right. So as we jump in here today to think a little bit about communication in the workplace, I want to hear from you all. I want to know, what is your biggest communication challenge at work right now? So if you are able to, you can grab this QR code right from the screen with your phone and it will take you right there. Or if you prefer, one of my lovely colleagues, thank you, Michelle, has just dropped a direct link into the chat. So feel free to click on that link and just start typing away. And everything that pops up is going to be completely anonymous, okay? So I would like you to be as honest as possible. No one will know who wrote it, but what is your biggest communication challenge? You can either click that link directly in the chat or just go to menti.com and enter that code in the chat. I'll leave the QR code up for one more moment and then I will go ahead and switch to sharing the Menti. Oh, thank you, Andrew. I'm going to get over there right now. I think I'm on the wrong slide here. Give me one moment. All right. Here we go. Let's jump back to the beginning here. All right. What is your biggest communication challenge at work right now? That should be what everyone is looking at. It's not my job. Yeah, I think we've all sort of heard that a couple times. Time is such a limited factor for all of us. A lack of communication in general. Yeah. Not enough of communication in general. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that. Closing the loop, really interesting one. So maybe some communication is happening, but it's not really coming full circle in the way we would like it to. Hoarding information. Ooh, these are really good ones. Keep them coming, everyone. And I have this set up as a word cloud. So if people say the same thing, it should make the word a little bit bigger. But I'm seeing a lot of similar concepts in here. People feeling kind of disengaged, right? If someone's not super engaged, they're probably not communicating very much. Misunderstandings. Yeah, that's a big communication challenge. Too many channels. Yeah. Transparency, or perhaps a lack thereof, something we hear a lot. Yep, lack of transparency, there it is. Okay, poor leadership. Yeah, definitely a big role for leadership to play in our communication. Okay, wow, really interesting things. Thank you all so much for sharing. And hopefully, looking at this, it might feel a little intimidating that, oh my goodness, there are so many challenges that we need to overcome. But I'd like you all also to look at this and think, hey, you know what? I'm not alone in these challenges. And look at all of my colleagues from across the nation that are experiencing some of these very same challenges in communication in their workplace. And I see someone in the chat here, siloed communication. Absolutely, that's a big challenge as well. Um, and great. So we're going to hopefully address most of, if not all of these in our presentation today, because these barriers are very real. But there are things that we can do that are not huge lifts that can help us to start addressing these challenges and overcoming them, to start having some more productive and positive communication. So thank you everyone for participating in that. Get our kind of juices flowing here a little bit. And let me just go ahead and switch back to my presentation. All right. Okay. So we know there's a lot of communication challenges, and here today we're hopefully going to learn a little something about what we can do about those. So, first things first, when we are thinking about workplace communication, we really want to frame this through the lens of workforce well-being. So, here at the STAR Center, when we think about wellness and what that means in the workplace, we really like to use this four-pillar model, the four pillars of wellness, the things that contribute to us having a culture of wellness for our workforce at our health centers. And that includes physical wellness, emotional wellness, financial wellness, and communication wellness. It's actually the fourth pillar that we talk about when we're talking about this. So I just wanted to sort of start there and really get us to start thinking about communication as something that we can invest in for the benefit and well-being of our workforce. It really is critically important. And it affects every single piece of work that we're able to do at our health centers or whatever organization you are with. So why is this important? Why is workplace communication important? I think we all know that it is really critical as a part of making sure that we are operating effectively. And so if we have effective workplace communication, that's going to help us to reduce conflicts. It's going to enhance our relationships with the people that we work with. It's going to increase our productivity and create that space for constructive and meaningful feedback. It'll increase your employee engagement and also your job satisfaction of your employees. It'll help you to build organizational loyalty and trust, which will also help you to reduce your turnover. And it'll also help facilitate the proper utilization of resources, making sure we're really maximizing what we have here. Lastly, it'll help you uncover new employee talents that you may have not otherwise known about. So I think we can all agree that communication is so, so critically important in the workplace. And this is not even an exhaustive list, but these are all of the potential impacts of workplace communication on the experience of our employees, of the patients we are serving, of really everyone within our ecosystem. When we think about this, right, it may seem fairly obvious, but open communication is what is going to foster trust and engagement amongst your staff, whereas poor communication is really going to contribute to burnout, which eventually will contribute to turnover. And as we all know, there is quite a high cost of that to our organizations and to our teams. So really can't emphasize enough how important this is. And I think you all already know that, which is why you have taken time out of your very busy days to join us here today. As we just sort of saw with that Mentimeter exercise, there are a lot of things that can kind of get in the way of effective communication in the workplace. And again, this is not a complete list, but these are some of the most common communication barriers that we see in the workplace today, right? Number one, and I saw this on the Menti in some of your responses, is siloed teams or sites. Right? If we have these really sort of narrow barriers around what teams are doing what work, and that information is not flowing from one silo to another, it really creates these very massive blind spots. And we lose an opportunity to have a cohesive work environment where we know what's going on across those silos. Another thing that often gets in the way of communicating effectively is infrequent or unclear messaging. right? If you hear from your leadership maybe once or twice a year randomly and you're not sure what triggers that communication or not, that is challenging. It's challenging to not know when you can expect what kind of information and through what channel. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we get into things today. But another common barrier is a lack of structured feedback, right? When we think about communication and the way that information flows within an organization, feedback and gathering it in an intentional way is a really important piece of that. And we'll touch on that a little bit as well. But without structured feedback and really intentional channels and systems to gather feedback, we're really creating an environment where people are going to have feedback, right? And if there's no place for that to go, things might start being shared a little bit more informally around the water cooler. That's when we start to see a dip in morale and some other consequences. So it's really important that we look at this barrier and think strategically about how to overcome a lack of structured feedback. Something that we see at a lot of organizations, and I know I've personally had this experience in my work history as well, is a real over-reliance on top-down communication. So, decisions are being made at the highest level of the organization, and there's this reliance on some kind of chain of command, if you will, right? That the information is going to trickle down from directors to managers to coordinators to whomever, whatever that looks like in your organization. It may seem like a good strategy, but if that is the only available pathway for information and communication to happen, then we are missing a huge opportunity here. The people at the bottom of that chain have no real meaningful opportunity to communicate their experiences, to inform the decisions being made at the top in a meaningful way. So, anytime we're seeing this sort of unidirectional, one-directional communication, especially if it's going from the top down, that should raise a little flag in our heads to say, wait a minute, what are we missing here by relying on this one stream of communication? And then, as you all very rightly noted in your Mentimeter responses, a lack of communication in general, right? We can have really great communication strategies, but if we don't use them and information is not shared, that's a problem, right? And people don't have the information that they're going to need to be able to effectively do their jobs, right? So as we know, there's a lot more that gets in the way of communication. But again, just want to name for you all that these are some of the most common barriers and that you are not alone if you are facing some of these barriers within your organization. And hopefully you'll leave here today with a few ideas and strategies about how to start overcoming some of these. And that takes us to our next section, strategies for effective communication. So the first thing I'd really like to touch on here, because I hear this feedback a lot when we're giving presentations around things like organizational communication. So you'll have some participants say, hey, listen, like all of these top high level strategies are really great, but my people on the ground don't have the skills to implement them, right? And we need to be doing more skill building. Or on the other hand, you'll get feedback that says, you know what, this session was about building communication skills, and that's great, but nothing is going to change unless we have the systems and structures in place to support this issue, right? So I hear that a lot of, this is an individual issue, right? That we need professional development, or this is a systems issue. Why are we spending time on individual development? Spoiler alert, I'm here today to tell you that we need both. That if we really want to invest in strong organizational communication, we need to be looking at this in a twofold way. We need to look at both individual skill building, equipping the people on our staff and in our communities with the skills and tools that they need to be able to communicate more effectively, and we need to make sure that we have the codified systems, channels, and organizational norms to support the execution of those individual skills. You can spend a lot of time and money investing in one or the other, and that's a great place to start. But if you're not thinking holistically about both, you're really going to be missing something here about really implementing effective communication in a way that is sustainable and effective and appropriate for your organization. So I want you all to sort of keep this in mind as we continue to go through our presentation today, and we'll circle back to it at the end. But I just think it's so important that we are not putting the onus for communication on just individuals or just on organizational systems. In order for things to be really effective, we really need to think about investing in both side by side. And you'll see if you start thinking about it this way, an investment in one really helps to catalyze an investment in the other. And it's not quite as big of a lift as it might sound to do this in a twofold approach. So, when we're thinking about organizational communication, there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's a lot that I could be referring to when I talk about organizational communication. But here we've laid out for you just some of the key elements that go into organizational communication, because this is not just one thing, right? When we talk about communication, we're not just talking about how well is your email newsletter worded and is the grammar correct, right? Maybe that's important, right? But that is just one little tiny sliver of what it means to think about organizational communication. So when we zoom out a little bit and we think about this from a higher lens, and look at the organization as a whole, there's several different things that we need to be considering as a whole, as a part of the holistic organizational communication picture, right? The first of which being leadership buy-in. And I saw that in some of your responses that continues to be a challenge for folks, and we hear this all the time, right? But you could have incredible systems for communication, and if your leadership is not bought in and modeling those systems, you're going to run into challenges, right? The next thing that we can think about is information pathways. So how is information flowing from one place to another, right? Is it making it out of those silos? Is there opportunities for information to travel from the bottom up or just the top down, right? You can almost visualize this if you're a visual learner as like a map, right? And what are those pathways? How does a piece of information or a question or feedback or a new policy, how does that get from point A to point B? So, kind of hand in hand with the pathways themselves, we can also think about the tools and modalities that we have available to support that communication. And again, we'll get into each of these a little bit more as we continue to go. But let's not just assume that, like, if we have information to be shared, we're just going to share it, right? We really need to get a little bit more specific about what that looks like. Through what channel are we going to share it? At what time are we going to share it? To whom are we going to share it, right? So all of these different tools and modalities that are available to us to help get information from one place to another. And we know as the workplace continues to evolve, as technology continues to evolve, we are just seeing more and more and more available tools and modalities, which is fantastic. But more isn't always better, right? We need to really be intentional about the ones that we are leveraging that make sense for our individual organizations. And then the last piece here to think about as we're thinking about organizational communication is the organizational norms. And that's sort of the unspoken norms of your workplace. And that's really going to support all three of the things above it, right? If we have great leadership buy-in and we have very clear information pathways and we're all aligned on the tools and modalities that we're using, we then need to have the organizational environment that is going to support the continued use of those, right? We need that buy-in from everyone to say this is an organization that prioritizes effective communication and it is a part of who we are and how we operate. Right. So that one I think gets overlooked sometimes. And that's where the less formal things are happening in our organizational norms. And so if we're not intentional about the other spaces, then the norms kind of take over, right? And those norms can be sometimes unhealthy communication habits, like things like gossiping or, sharing information informally, and in a non-official way, right? And so we just want to make sure when we're thinking about the organization as a whole that we're really examining how communication functions on all of these different levels with our leadership, with the information pathways, with the tools that we're using, and with the organizational norms that exist to support all of that. So leadership. I saw this came up for some of us, and I'm sure we've all had a ton of experience with both positive and negative leadership communication. But I think we can all agree that it has a very significant effect on the overall organizational communication. And I'll just quickly sort of read for you this quote here that transparent leadership means leading with openness, honesty, and authenticity. Transparent leaders keep their teams informed. They share information freely. They create environments where open communication flows in all directions, right? Not just that top down. They don't just communicate when things are going well. Instead, they maintain honest dialogue even during challenging times. And this is such an important concept, right? Leadership is often sort of the culture builder of the organization, right? And we talk about this a lot, that leadership really needs to model the values that the organization holds, right? And a lot of times I think there's this conflation of this idea between access to information and access to decision-making power, right? And sometimes folks in leadership roles have, sort of fears around more people thinking they have decision-making power when we know that sometimes that decision-making power really needs to sit with like the top of leadership, right? But just because someone has access to information does not mean that they have access to decision-making power, right? And in fact, the more information is available across your organization, the more equipped your staff is going to be to effectively do their jobs, right? And so I think a lot of times there's this sort of this fear, right, of this risk of like oversharing. If we tell our employees too much, it's going to turn around and bite us somehow, right? But actually, it's the opposite that's true. The more informed people are, the more information they have, the more valued they're going to feel as a part of your organization, the more equipped they're going to be to make good decisions in their job if they have more information available to inform those decisions, right? So there's a lot to be said about really thinking about leadership's role in a strategic way here, and not just communicating when things are going great, or when we're in a time of crisis, right? But it's important that that communication is consistent regardless of what's going on, right? If there are positive things to call out and share appreciation, fantastic, right? If there are new challenges that are facing your organization that need to be communicated to staff, that's important too. If it's a regular old Tuesday and it's business as usual, it's still important that we have that touch point and that communication coming from leadership, and that there are also pathways for that information to get to leadership. There are some things we can do to help support this, right? It's not all on the shoulders of the individual person in a leadership role. Again, remember, we're talking individual skills, so maybe that means folks in leadership roles getting some more training and professional development around communication. But there's also the other side of that coin, which is the systems and the tools and the strategies that we can invest in to support that communication. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And we have heard from folks all over that are doing this in very different ways. There's no one right answer here. But there's a lot that you can do as someone in leadership, right? Things like town halls, where you create this open space for people to come and ask questions and share information. It can be very powerful. Things like open door policies, right? And I'm a little hesitant on this one because I think we've probably all had the experience of working for someone in leadership who says, my door is always open. Okay, what does that mean? Is it really always open? Can I really come to you with something? Words are great, but we need to back that up with our actions. And so really like having a very clear open door policy. Maybe it's a sign on your door that says, I'm working, but please come in, or, I'm in a meeting, please don't come in, right? But like those little things that can signal to folks what that really means beyond my door is always open, right? When can I really actually come talk to you? But even just the concept of that, right? Having yourself available to your staff can be really powerful. Again, updates from leadership. I can't emphasize this enough. This should not be the only communication channel that we talked about that of like updates just coming from leadership down. It can't be just that, but that is an important tool as well. And so having regular updates from leadership, whether that's within a staff meeting, on an internal newsletter, maybe you have a bulletin board in the staff room. I mean, there's many different ways that you can approach this, but having some kind of consistent container around where and when and how we can expect to hear from leadership, the things that are going on that those of us not in leadership maybe don't have insight into otherwise, that is very important. You can think about having chats with the CEO once a month, once a quarter. The CEO on a lunch break is in the break room and available to chat. This can be very informal, right? Things like rounding, that's another tool as well that you can use to really get those opportunities to engage with people in leadership, right? So again, there is no one size fits all approach. It depends on your organization. It depends on your leadership, your staff, how many people you have on staff, what your geographics of your sites look like, right? But there's a lot of different things that we can think about, and we can kind of take what serves us well and maybe leave what doesn't. But really, there's a lot of opportunities to leverage these tools to start thinking about leadership in a more transparent way, right? Transparency is huge when it comes to leadership. And as we saw in that quote before, it really has a very significant impact on your staff and their experiences. Now, leadership is not everything. We know it's an important piece of this, but I want to know if I've missed anything. So we're going to do another Menti. I want to know what is something that your leadership does to foster effective communication. And again, this is all anonymous, so no one will know who said what. But I want to know something that has worked well for you, that you have seen leadership done either at your current organization or it could be a past experience. But what do they do that works well to foster effective communication? Let's see what we can learn from one another. So I will stop sharing. You can go ahead and use that same exact link and code to get back into Menti where we just were. And I know you can all get there because you are brilliant and got there before. So let me go ahead and share that again. What is something that your leadership does to foster effective communication? There are no wrong answers and everything is anonymous. And thank you, Michelle. She just put the link again right in the chat. Okay, communication, they don't. I mean, that's real. That's a real thing we hear. Meetings are a great tool for communication. Transparency, right? And I think whoever wrote that can attest that really leaning into transparency has a big impact on your broader organization. That they're open, quarterly town halls, I think that's a great idea. Rounding and weekly emails, great tool, right? And the key here really is leveraging the tools that make sense for you and your organization. So if it doesn't make sense for your leadership's workload to have to sit down and write an email every week, maybe that's not the right tool for you, right? Maybe it's a monthly email or a bi-weekly email, right? There is no one size fits all. Team steps, they do what they say and they back it up with action, right? That's where that transparency comes in. And that's where we start building trust with leadership and with the broader organization. So, so important. Allowing time for staff input in team meetings, right? Those team meetings I know can be so, so precious, that time that we have together. And sometimes it's like we just need to relay information in one direction. Certainly, sometimes that needs to happen. But even saving that 5 minutes at the end to make sure there is space for information to flow the other way can have a huge, huge impact on your organization. Newsletter, emails, they set the tone, right? This idea of modeling the values and the behaviors that you'd like to see. Weekly huddles with preset topics across the organization. So everybody gets the same information on the same day. I think that's brilliant, right? An internal monthly newsletter, an internal communication dashboard. I'm seeing rounding coming up a lot. This is great. Thank you all for sharing this. And hopefully you can all sort of look through these and say, you know what, I saw on the last slide that people are struggling with the same things that we are struggling with. And I also see here that people are being really innovative and intentional in what they're doing to try to overcome some of those barriers. So maybe there's something here that you want to try. And listen, you don't have to get it perfect on the first time around. You could try holding a huddle or a town hall and realize that it doesn't really make sense for your organization and you're not getting a lot of value from it. And that's okay because you tried. And that signals something to your staff as well, that you care about creating spaces that work for them. Awesome. Losing bad communicators, yeah, right? And sometimes maybe there's an opportunity to lean into that first side of the coin around, investing in individual skill building. And sometimes there's not, right? And that's okay too. Great. Standard operating procedures. I love that. We're going to get into that just ahead here. Awesome. Okay, great. You know what? This is so great to see that that there are some positive things going on, right? Because I think when we step back and really think about, communication and all the challenges we're facing, it can feel very overwhelming, like we're fighting an uphill battle. So this is really great to see that there are positive things happening at your organizations, and that there are things, and even small things, that leadership can do to start moving the needle on things for the rest of the organization. Okay. Just a couple more thoughts on leadership, and then we'll move on to some other aspects here. Thank you all again for participating. You guys are Menti pros. Okay. So this is all to say that how leadership shows up matters. It matters. What you say and what you do matters. How you say it and the actions that you take matter. Really think about this multi-directional communication, right? Not just bi-directional, multi-directional. We want information flowing in as many ways as it can, right? Creating dialogues instead of just delivering information, right? Think about not being dismissive, being open, listening, learning, adapting. All of these things are really critical for how you show up as leaders. Really leaning into that strengths-based perspective, right? So instead of focusing on everything that went wrong, maybe yes, we need to address if something went wrong, but let's lean into all the skills and resources we have available to us to do better next time, right? And that sort of small shift in our perspective, really leaning into the strength of the employees that we have on board, really can make a huge difference in morale. It'll make a huge difference in the effectiveness of your communication, right? And never forget that a little bit of appreciation goes a really long way, right? Especially if it's coming from the top, but really from anyone. That's what helps morale stay high. That's what helps reduce your turnover. And that's a form of communication, right? I think oftentimes we get so busy, and I know your work is so important and you all have so much on your plates, right? That it feels like, oh, you want me to take, time out of my day to write someone a note to say you did a good job today? Yes, I do, because guess what? That's going to take you 30 seconds to do, and it's going to make that person's entire week, and it's going to make them excited to show up to work tomorrow and to get through the tough day that they have on Thursday. It has a really big impact. So I really want you to think about things like that. Think about things like sharing appreciation and creating space for dialogue as a real investment in your staff and in the future of your organization. Lastly, leadership needs to reflect the organization's goals in its day-to-day actions, right? A lot of you named that on the Menti, that having leadership who does what they say they're going to do is so, so valuable, right? And just remember that aligning your mission with the needs of your workforce is critical to see success, right? And just a little quote for you, right? Senior leaders need to model the way and visibly demonstrate desired behaviors or they risk losing credibility, right? And this applies across industries, across companies and organizations and environments, right? People are looking to the top to see how we as an organization live our values, and maintaining that sort of credibility and modeling those behaviors is just so, so important. All right. Enough about leadership for now. Very important piece, but that's not all that there is to it, right? The onus for effective workplace communication does not lie solely on the shoulders of leadership. It is one key component of it, but it is not everything. And so these two questions, I'd like you all to just take a moment and just reflect to yourselves on these, okay? I'm not looking for anyone to have any specific answers, but I want you to think about these. I want you to ask yourselves these questions. How does information flow within your organization? What do the mechanics of that look like? How do you know who to reach out to, when, and through which channels? These are the questions that I want you all to keep in mind as you go back to your organizations and start thinking about an effective communication strategy, right? An effective organizational communication strategy, you should be able to answer both of these questions in a heartbeat, right? You should know very clearly how information is going to flow. If we learn something, how does that get communicated to the rest of staff? If someone over here learns something, how does that get communicated to the rest of staff, right? If a problem arises, especially a time-sensitive one, how do you know who to bring that to, when to bring that to them, and through which channels, right? If something is an emergency, am I picking up the phone and calling the CEO? Or am I sending a Slack message to the CHRO? Or am I sending a text message to the CFO? Or am I sending a carrier pigeon to the janitor? You need to have answers to these questions, right? And this is what I want you all to keep in the back of your minds as we're moving through this next section, right? This is where we're going to center ourselves, because every single individual at the organization, regardless of what level they're at, should know the answers to both of these questions. And that's where the work is, right? The work is in establishing all of the norms and systems and channels and policies and procedures that are going to help us to make this super crystal clear. So there are many channels that exist to support communication. And as I mentioned, as technology continues to evolve, there are only going to be more of them, right? I may not have even captured them all here, right? But these are all the different ways that we can communicate within our organization, right? Staff meetings, team huddles, one-on-one conversations, newsletters that can be external or internal, Slack Messenger or Teams Messenger, depending on what platform you use, emails, Zoom or other platform video calls, right? Text messages, phone calls, right? And this goes back to the question I just asked. How do you know which of these to use in what case, right? I think we've all experienced this at one point or another in our careers, where you work on a team where there are 5 different individual preferences, right? And it really has nothing to do with systems or policies or anything codified within the organization. It's just, Mary only reads text messages, she'll never see her email, or, Joe doesn't know how to use Slack, so if you need something, you better pick up the phone and call him, right? And listen, it's okay that we all have different preferences around communication. What's important is that their expectations are clear about who to reach out to when and through which channel. So it's okay if people use different modalities. Everyone needs to know that and needs to know what the expectations are for how to reach someone, right? This is like a very busy slide, and this is probably not even all of the channels that exist. There's a lot of ways to communicate information. So here's a couple strategies. This comes from the Harvard Business Review, and just some things for us to think about to try and streamline all of this, to set ourselves up for success and really align those expectations around communication. So the first of which has to do with responsiveness expectations. And they urge you here to beware of the email urgency bias. And what this is actually fascinating. They've done studies on this. It turns out that the person receiving an email feels this internal pressure that the person who sent it is expecting a response immediately, right? I receive an email from my colleague Michelle, and I say, oh, this must be important. Michelle is probably expecting to hear back from me, within the hour, right? It turns out that's actually a false assumption. What happens is the person who sent the email actually has no expectation. There is no urgency on that end. Michelle, in this example, sent me that email and figured I'd get back to her whenever I had a minute within the next few days, right? But we, as the receiver of the email, have this like ingrained sense of urgency that because someone contacted us, I am now obligated to answer as quickly as humanly possible, right? So this is just to pause and recognize that's mostly make-believe, right? Those are internal pressures that we put on ourselves. And more often than not, the person sending the email has no expectation of urgency, right? Unless they clearly state, like, please get back to me by the end of the day, this is urgent, right? Then we take them for their word. But what matters here is that we are establishing clear norms across communication channels, right? So for example, I know on my team, if Michelle sends me an email, I don't need to answer it within the next 5 minutes. If Michelle needs my answer or attention to something within the next hour, I know she's going to send me a Slack message or she's going to send me a text message, right? Because that is the norms that we have established on our team for where the higher priority things are going to go. So again, there's no right or wrong. It doesn't matter if, email is get to it when you can and Slack is get to it right away, or if it's the complete opposite, right? What matters is that everyone is aligned on what the expectations for that are, right? So, make sure that's clear. I've seen a lot of people, have wonderful out of office replies or at the bottom of their email signature, it'll say something like, I work at weird hours and, there's no expectation that you'll respond to my email outside of working business hours, right? Those are just the hours I keep. And things like that are really helpful for establishing those norms, right? Is somebody expected to answer an email if it comes in at 7 p.m.? Right? And that might seem obvious to you, but especially if it's a new hire and they don't know that, you see an email come in and you're going to think that it's important, right? So being really clear that like, listen, if anything comes in after work hours, you'll deal with it tomorrow, unless it's an urgent emergency, in which case I will call you on the phone, right? Again, being really super duper clear about what those expectations are. And thank you, Michelle just kind of reiterated that in the chat, right? And she's so good about this. She lets us all know like that there's never an expectation to answer outside of work hours, even if she's sending during that time, right? Which is great. But if Michelle never communicated that to us clearly and never set that expectation, I would probably be having a very different experience over here. If Michelle's like emailing me at weird hours and I'm like, why is she emailing me at weird hours? Does she think I'm going to answer? Do I have to answer? Right? We want to avoid that confusion. And again, just to take this one step further, the next sort of bucket here is that we want to think about using specific channels for specific uses. Because as we just saw, there are so many channels that are available to us. And what we want to avoid is having to like frantically check every platform because you might have missed a piece of information. Because it may have come, via Slack, it may have come via email, it may have come via text message or via our WhatsApp group chat, or should I go check the porch for a pigeon, right? And so in order to sort of avoid that time waste, we really need to make sure that we are very explicitly aligned on what those norms and expectations are. And then it's really critically important that we are consistent in adhering to those, right? So urgent, quick questions, we use Slack, right? Longer questions that require a little bit more explanation and maybe don't require the most immediate response, we'll use an email, right? A challenging situation that we really need to brainstorm together to problem solve and sift through, we will reach out to set up a Zoom call and we will hop on Zoom and talk it out together, right? And that's just an example of how our team works. But really being very explicit on those norms and expectations is so, so important, right? If you need me urgently, you text my cell phone, right? If you don't need me urgently, you send me an email and I'll get to it as soon as I have time, right? And then lastly, we want to make this easy for ourselves. We want to make this easy as possible for our colleagues and our employees. So make information easy to grasp, even for skimmers, right? I think there's like this misconception that like, more is better, or if I write out more, it shows I care more or I know more or something. But less is more. I mean, there's been studies on this too. You can go check out this source that fewer words actually have a faster response time because we're all busy, right? There's a quote in there from someone, and I'm forgetting who now, that something, sorry, my, reply is so long. If I had more time, I would have made it shorter, right? Because it's difficult. It's difficult to be concise sometimes, but really try, right? Really try to be as clear as possible because we don't want things getting lost in paragraphs and paragraphs of things that are maybe not as important, right? We want to be respectful, right, and polite in our communications, but sometimes less is more, right? And being really clear about like, what is the ask here? What do I need from you? What do I need you to know, right? Really drilling into that can be super helpful for really streamlining communications. Okay. I want to know what else you all are doing. I want to know what other ways your health centers are facilitating communication. What are the things that help you to communicate well or better than you had been? So we're going to go right back to that same Menti. All of your answers are still anonymous. So I will stop sharing this. You can head right back to that same link and I will pull it up for you all. Again, I and my colleagues on the STAR Center, we have a certain degree of expertise from our own experience and our own vast library of resources. But you all are the experts in this because you are doing it every day. And so I think there's a real opportunity here for us to learn from one another. Okay, we've got some thoughts in here already. What are other ways your health center facilitates communication? What have I missed here? Okay, it sounds like we've got some challenges with leadership. Maybe you can gently direct them to the recording of this webinar when we're done here today, or to some of the other resources we have around supporting leadership. Closing the loop, I see. That's great. Let's see. Okay, unnecessary CCs. Yeah, I'm seeing kind of a mixture here of some challenges and some things that are working, which makes sense, right? We hear communication and we think like, oh, I know how to communicate. Like people have been talking to me about communication forever. I learned this when I was 4 years old. But really, there's so much that goes into it. This is so much more complicated than people really give it credit for. Let's see, transparency, lunch meetings, site visits to individual practices and offices, right? I think sometimes we lose the trees amongst the forest. So creating space intentionally to check in with the trees can be super valuable. Zoom is a great tool. There's really nothing like being in a room with someone, but if we can at least see their face through a screen, that is helpful as well, right? We all know that nonverbal communication is like the lion's share of communication. And so when you can't read someone's tone of voice or see their facial expression, or if they're wild hand gestures like I use, things can get lost and miscommunicated, right? Being the middleman between direct reports and upper management, right? There's pros and cons to that as well, right? We can look at that as a real opportunity to make sure information is flowing in both directions. That's also a lot of pressure on the person in the middle. And if they are not living up to their end of the bargain, that's going to create a lot of challenges up and down, right? Constant changes, constant redirection, and it's hard for people to keep up. I mean, that makes sense, especially in today's climate. There's a lot changing very quickly, right? And so making sure we're really investing in communication is so, so critically important because we can never assume that somebody else on another team has the same information that we have. Right? We really need to prioritize making sure everyone has access to information. And again, I implore you to not operate from a fear-based perspective of they'll have too much information, right? You need to flip that on its head and say more information is better. Just because someone has access to information does not mean they have access to decision-making power, right? It just means that they are more informed and better positioned to do their job. Frequent surveying of staff needs. Yes, very good. Inviting staff to help create those guidelines and templates. Amazing, right? And then there's a form or template for that. What a brilliant approach, right? You know, you can spend hours sitting here coming up with all these great communication protocols, and if you try to roll them out, you might find this doesn't actually work for anybody, right? And so it's a great place to start from talking to your people and your staff to understand from them how they prefer to communicate, right? And then meet people where they're at and design the systems in a way that people are actually going to use. Great. Multi-directional and timely. Email mainly, that's totally fine, right? We don't need to leverage every single one of those channels. We just need to know which to use when, right? And make sure everyone is aligned and make sure everyone is consistent, right? Great. Okay. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I know that sometimes these are hard things to be open about. So just in our last few minutes here, I want to kind of take us through a couple of other ideas, because there, again, as I mentioned, there are so many different aspects to all of this when we're thinking about organizational communication. And it sounds like a lot of you are already doing a lot of really wonderful things. So that's great. Keep doing that. Keep trying things until you figure out the thing that works best for you. Okay. So somebody just mentioned, this is an excellent segue, as feedback as a tool for effective communication, right? We've been talking a lot about this multi-directional communication and making sure that it's not just going from the top down. Gathering feedback is your number one tool for doing that, right? There are a lot of benefits to being really intentional about gathering feedback from staff. You'll see increased retention, decreased absenteeism, improved productivity, improved patient experience, increased staff morale, all of these things, right? You cannot put a price tag on all of these things, and it is worth the investment of time into systems and methods for collecting feedback. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And again, like with all of this, there is no one right answer. You need to do what makes sense for your organization and your staff. And we have a lot of resources on a lot of these different topics at the STAR Center. So if you're curious about digging in a little bit further to this idea of gathering feedback, please reach out to us and we're happy to help you think some of that through and share some other resources with you. But this could look a number of different ways. This could be formal employee engagement surveys. This could be less formal pulse check-ins with your employees, things like town halls, making sure there's time in one-on-one check-ins and conversations for information to flow both ways and for feedback to be shared, and then understanding where that feedback goes outside of that one-on-one. How do we then pass that along? Right? Thinking about stay interviews, not just exit interviews when someone's already leaving, but stay interviews and try to understand what's working well for folks and what maybe there's room for improvement. Even something so simple like a suggestion box in the break room. It might sound silly, but when folks see that there's this real opportunity for them to offer their feedback and that it's going to go somewhere, it makes a huge difference in terms of their experience at work. So again, a lot of different things we can do, but we cannot overlook this idea of gathering feedback as a piece of this broader communication puzzle. And then even more than just gathering the feedback, it's so important that we respond to the feedback. right? This quote says, perhaps even more important than gathering feedback regularly is doing something about the data you collect. People will be frustrated if you seek input and then do not take action, even more than if you don't ask for feedback at all. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to this sentiment. I know I can, right? Don't ask me for my feedback if you're never going to do anything with it. Now you've just wasted my time, and I trust you even less than if you had not asked me in the first place, right? So not only thinking strategically about all the different ways we can gather the feedback, but really making sure that we are doing something about it, right? And listen, this doesn't mean that you have to implement every suggestion that every person has, right? Not everything is a yes, but even communicating the no and communicating it with context is hugely valuable, right? To come back to your staff and say, hey, listen, we went through the results of the employee engagement survey. Like the majority of you were asking for XYZ. We hear you. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible for us right now because of constraint A, B, and C. And should anything change on those in the future, we will be sure to let you know. But it's a no for now, and here is why, right? I think sometimes we're so afraid to say no, we lose out on that opportunity to build trust and transparency by saying, I hear you, and we can't do it right now. And here's what would have to change for us to be able to do it, right? Very, very important. Okay. I'm going to wrap it all up here and put it all together because there's a lot of different things that we just talked about. But there's also a lot at stake here. Turnover is expensive. I don't think I need to tell any of you that, right? If you're curious exactly how expensive it is for your health center, you can take a look at our STAR Center Financial Assessment for Provider Turnover tool. It's an interactive tool that you can plug information in and get a real number out of what this is actually costing you. But some reflective questions as well to ask yourself. What's the actual cost here? What is the cost of having a provider vacancy? How much does it cost us to recruit someone new? How much are we losing to these workforce issues? And how might we better invest our time and resources to retain our staff and minimize our turnover, right? Really, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about having a well-running, efficient, engaged employee community, right? Through investing in effective communication, and all of that is going to contribute to reducing your turnover. I'm not going to read through this, but you will receive these slides and you can look through it on your own. I don't think I need to tell you all how expensive turnover is. This is just some statistics about the healthcare field in general, because there's a high cost here, and we know it's getting harder and harder to recruit new folks. And so making the investment in retaining the ones that you have is going to be invaluable to your organization. So just to wrap it all up, organizational communication is a core aspect of workforce well-being. It is not a nice to have, it is a key element of how well your employees are experiencing their jobs. Workplaces that prioritize effective communication have increased rates of retention. People will want to stay the more effective your communication is across the organization. Clear communication channels and norms support the efficient flow of information, which is going to save you time, and it is going to help you avoid blind spots. Those blind spots happen when we are in silos and information is not making it all the way across the organization. And lastly, strong communication norms are going to help to ensure alignment across your organization. That is going to enhance everyone's ability to meet their organizational goals, right? This is really an investment for your entire organization, and you will see the benefits in your patient and your client populations as well. You will see the benefits in terms of your internal experience of your staff, of their productivity, of your ability to meet your broader goals. So really cannot emphasize enough how important all of this is. And then lastly, just to bring it back around one more time, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here, that in order to appropriately invest in very strong organizational communication, we need to invest in individual skills and organizational systems. If those two things are working in concert with one another, you will see a huge improvement in your communication. And as we just discussed, you'll see huge improvements across the board. So that's what I have for you today. Tons of great resource articles in here if anyone's interested in digging in a little deeper to any of these concepts. And I believe we've got 4 minutes left. Please sign up for our newsletter. If you're not already signed up, you can find out about wonderful training opportunities such as this. And of course, stay in touch. But I am happy to take a couple of questions. If anybody has any, feel free to raise your hand or type your questions in the chat. And I appreciate you all joining us today. But does anyone have any questions? Michelle, please.
So, not a question. I just wanted, as I was seeing in the presentation, a lot of people talked about the difficulty of kind of that top-down communication from leadership. And I know sometimes just the complexity of timing, how busy people are. And one thing that we established here at ACU are supervisor meetings with senior leadership, which I think have been really helpful in streamlining that. So really, it's the middle management, the directors, the people that serve as supervisors. We meet on a regular basis with, I think on a quarterly basis, with our senior leadership and really just talk about the strategy and what is the messaging to bring back to our staff members. So I'm very honored that I get to supervise Sydney and Mariah, but it's also helpful, and I think so. To Sydney's point, so it doesn't fall on just one person, but really everybody is engaged in that. So I do see that there is a question in the chat, so just wanted to add that piece.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate that. And I think you're exactly right. And I think what you shared is a really great example of us organically building a communication system that was responsive to our needs as an organization, right? We were all sort of feeling sort of a gap in the flow of information and said, hey, what if we tried this thing to try to bridge that gap? And, we got the go ahead and said, okay, let's try it. Right. And it's that kind of willingness to take some risks, right? It's funny even saying risk taking because it's pretty low stakes to say, let's throw a managers meeting on the calendar. But it is something new, right? And those sort of like bespoke, you know, opportunities to really try to meet our unique needs are what's going to help make the difference for your organization. I wish I could give you all like a communications plan template and say, here, go do this. But it's not going to work, right? Because some of your health centers have 10 people on staff and some of your health centers have 1,200 people on staff. And so you're going to need to sort of look at things a little bit differently. And don't be afraid to try things, right? And to, and just one more thing to Michelle's point is you're never going to understand where those gaps are if you don't have opportunities to hear about them, right? If staff don't have opportunities to share their experience and say, hey, listen, I think something's up here. What if we tried this thing, right? So leadership buy-in, opportunities for feedback, not being afraid to try new things, right? All of these things are going to help make a difference for you. And I'm sorry about the trouble with the link there. I think we've got some alternative links in the chat for you all to stay tuned to our newsletter that goes out, and we'll keep you all up to date on all things STAR Center. On your screen should have just popped up a post-session evaluation. We greatly appreciate you taking a moment to fill that out. It's a part of our funding requirements, so thank you in advance for doing that. And please don't hesitate to reach out if anyone has any questions after today's session. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, same time, same place, for part 2 of this session, of this webinar series. And that will be focused on conflict resolution in the workplace. So if you registered for today, you are already registered for that. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much.